we've talked about visibility, we've talked about clarity, and we're going to talk about a related element of that today, aren't we, Matt? And I'm perhaps going to let you take a bit more ownership of this particular topic because that's where we are, right? We're talking about ownership and responsibility.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And specifically, what we're trying to, or what we want to unpack today is who is responsible, or how do you demonstrate the responsibility you have around adhering to the principles that we've been speaking about? So, for example,
Yeah.
with regards to visibility, we mentioned a lot when we spoke about visibility about how you show where your work is within your workflow through the Kanban board.
Yeah.
But whose job is it to make sure that those cards are in the right place and that they are moved? How do you know whether that's your responsibility or someone else's? And so what we're talking about really is how ownership and responsibility is the grease that ensures the wheels of accelerated digital delivery can keep on working.
What maybe it's interesting to start at what's it like in a team or a process where the responsibility isn't clear or someone isn't taking the ownership of their particular task properly?
I think there's lots of telltale signs. Specifically, it's when the definition of done hasn't been clearly articulated, for example. So
Yeah.
you might, for example, as a designer, if you think about your role within this system as a job,
Mm-hmm.
you think about that. Your as a designer, your customer is the development team, for example, or it might be
Yeah.
the product owner. But let's simplify this. Let's say your customer is the as a developer. Therefore, in the process, you need to have a clear definition of what done looks like, and that will be fed on what the developer's requirements is. So, for example, done might be that you produce a design or a wireframe in both desktop and mobile experience, that you have had a conversation with a content writer to make sure that all of the copy is is correct. And so therefore you
Yeah.
have this sort of checklist. We talk about checklists a lot.
Mm-hmm.
The most undervalued technology in terms of productivity there has ever been is the humble
Mm.
checklist. So it might be that you've got this checklist of things that, in order to know that your job is done, that you can hand this over successfully to the designer, to the developer, you have to have made desktop view version of the page, mobile version of the page. You have to have, made sure the copy is finished, that you've set the image to dev done in Figma if you're using Figma to do that. And so
Yeah.
these are that's what a good process looks like. A bad process would be if I hog out some wireframes, chuck it over the fence at the developer and say, here you are. And then you have to have 15 different conversations trying to uncover the elements of done that you haven't completed. So, a
Yeah.
developer might come to you and say, well, where are the mobile designs? Well, okay, you're now having to go back and redo a portion of the work. If you're having to redo the work, you now no longer have an accelerated digital delivery process because you thought you would be finished to move on to your next thing, and you're
Yeah.
having to revisit the thing that you had, that wasn't done properly in the first place. So this is where I suppose, and we've talked a lot about this, is where does the responsibility lie
Yeah.
with this? Because in an accelerated delivery process, you have to make the assumption that everybody is a grown up. Everybody wants to succeed in their jobs for themselves, and they want to succeed in the teams that they're working for
Yeah.
because they want their team to succeed, and therefore the business succeeds. That should be the underlying assumption. We've spoken about trust as like the big principle for
Yeah.
this, right? This trust is what keeps the whole thing working. In order for that to happen, you have to, trust the people you work with, and therefore you have to be clear on what your responsibilities are,
Yeah.
and that we can service each other's needs, I suppose.
So there's almost two layers to this, isn't there? There's as the business owner, you have a responsibility to make the requirements clear. So that's on you. That's on your side. On the
Yeah.
other side is the particular person, whether it's a developer or a designer, copywriter, whatever. They then have to take the responsibility to follow and adhere, and also, we might talk about this later, also improve the standards. I
Yes.
mean, the almost every business I've worked in, that the point where things come unstuck is the handover. We've talked about handovers before, but the point where a
Yeah.
job moves between people or even businesses or digital processes or whatever it is, this is the point where so often we get stuck. And the best people I've known, whether they've been designers or developers or content creators like I am, they are talking to their customer. Might be a customer with a small c if it's the
Yeah.
next rung up the ladder, and they are having a conversation about, how can I make this easier for you? How can I improve this?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And that's the key. You're absolutely right. The business has to define the standards by which they operate in. So, you will set what the quality thresholds are for your work. I think you are also absolutely right that the biggest points of failure in any system is the handover
yeah,
process, whether it's requirements to design, design to dev,
be
dev to
terrible.
test,
Yeah,
whatever it is. Each one of those have the potential to break the whole process, and you have multiple times throughout the whole system. The whole, it can break. So, that's where particular attention has to be paid to make sure that those elements are smooth. And a lot of the consultancy work that I do for delivery teams is specifically around smoothing out those handover processes.
yeah,
Sometimes those handover processes don't happen at all, which is like, feels a little bit Wild West to me. Sometimes they happen, but they haven't got a clearly defined set of outcomes. And I think
yeah,
our job our job as consultants, but our job in an accelerated delivery uh, system is to make sure that everyone is aware of what their responsibilities are for those handovers and what standards they adhere to, and make sure that we are mentoring and hiring the people that are most aligned to want to do those things for themselves and for the businesses they work for. Because this process is about optimization, but it optimizes on the best qualities of an individual for a successful outcome,
yeah,
because you can't be
yeah.
successful if you can't do these things properly. So actually it improves your overall capability, as well as making sure that the system and the business that is implementing it works well.
Yeah, and that's such a critical thing, I think, because very often, I mean, you obviously you do mentorship and you're mentoring your people anyway, but very often that so handovers are really important. But the bit of work that you're doing, if you're taking proper responsibility for that, you're also optimizing the process by which you
Yeah.
do it, because we're all living in this incredibly competitive world. If you want to do well, I hope that we all want to do great work, but we also want to do that work as efficiently as possible, and that means keeping on top of your own processes and optimizing that, continually optimizing those as well. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of layers to this kind of ownership, this responsibility sort of piece, aren't they? And they go all the way down. And I think to touch on something you just said, some people aren't ready for it.
Yeah.
Some people will never be ready for it. This is my experience. I certainly wasn't ready for it when I was, I don't know, 22 or 21 or something. Hopefully for a lot of us, we learn. It's a bit like, when I was a kid, my bedroom was always a total disaster. And in the end, you learn that it's actually easier if you keep your bedroom relatively tidy, if
Yeah.
you keep your workspace relatively clutter free, things become easier. And some, dare I say, some people may never learn that lesson, and they're constantly going through this process of, um, well, they don't change, they don't improve, they don't optimize, and in some cases, I think if we're being honest from a business point of view, there are some people for whom it's just not going to work out, and however much mentoring you give them, they are neither not ready or will never be ready to take the kind of responsibility and ownership that you're talking about in an accelerated delivery process.
I think you're absolutely right. I think what I will add to that is that as an organization, as somebody who implements an accelerated delivery process, it is, as we mentioned, it is your responsibility to say, these are the standards by which we expect you to be. So it's your
Mm.
responsibility when you, for example, let's say you've got a Trello board and then you've
Yeah.
got your columns which denote where you are in the system. So backlog, up next, design, design sign off, develop, developer sign off, UAT test, whatever it is, whatever these columns are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, as you move those cards through the system, what you should be getting is what you can obviously set up this way. If you don't automate it, then you can put these in, but you should have a checklist in that card that says, what does done look like, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the very least, those should all be checked before they're moved on, right? Because if you clearly specify in that artifact that you have to have, for example, created a mobile version of that screen, you
Mm.
have to have recorded a walkthrough of what the intended flow or use of that process is, that feature is. You have to have had Nick review the content to make sure that it's aligned with our content strategy for something like that. If those three
Yeah.
things are in that card and they have been ticked off, then the card can progress, right? If someone
Mm.
ticks it off and has never done that work, then they will be
Yeah.
found out pretty quickly, won't they?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the system
Yeah.
self heals like that. Now, as an, you're absolutely right, 100%. There are some people that will never meaningfully or purposefully take responsibility for themselves in the way that we want to. But I can 100% guarantee you that if you do not specify what those standards are, what those checklists are, then nobody will adhere to it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you are more likely to get more people to adhere to your standards if they are very clearly defined in the work item that
Yeah.
people are chasing through the system. I mean, so Nick and I are working on some articles that we write around accelerated digital delivery. And in the Word document that we have where we write the document, at the end of it, I think we've got a checklist which is about 2 pages long. And
Yeah.
it says, has Matt reviewed it? Yes. Has
Mm.
Nick reviewed it? Yes. Have we created the teaser for the LinkedIn post? Yes.
Yeah.
And that's in that area. And we have those standards are declared every time. Every
Yeah. Yeah.
owner, I can then turn around and say, oh, Nick, where's that LinkedIn stuff? I don't even need to ask Nick where the LinkedIn bit is. I know that I can go into that document, move down to that. If that isn't ticked off, that isn't done, either Nick's not got around to it yet, or it's there and then I can just use it. And this is
Yeah.
what you and I we do these things anyway because we're old enough and we've been stung enough by this, by not
Yeah.
responsibilities, that we will just do it naturally.
Yeah.
I had another copywriter in that place. I had those checklists. I could still run through and get those checklists ticked off and validate exactly where in the process that is. And they
Yeah.
would have a clear expectation about the things they needed to do because they exist. That checklist exists.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that I'm like you. I come, I come to the. I'm a very positive person. I come to all these situations like saying everyone wants to do the best that they can.
Mm.
Everybody wants to succeed. Everyone wants to succeed as part of a team, and they want the people they work for to succeed as well. You know, why not be positive about this?
Sure,
Uh,
sure.
but it's all about setting those expectations, being clear. It this feeds into trust. This feeds into who is responsible for the visibility within the system, moving the cards and
Yeah,
ticking it off, and also the clarity that is what is expected of you and what do you expect of other people through this process.
yeah,
So it touches on that
yeah,
whole
yeah.
aspect of it.
I think there's so this is interesting because one of the things that people might not expect if they hadn't seen our checklists is the amount of detail in there. Because I think this is something where a lot of processes trip up, and I used to trip up on this because you say something needs to be done, but very often it's helpful if you specify exactly how it's, particularly if you want to do something fast. So take uploading a video to YouTube. You can have a single item in that list saying we're going to upload a video to YouTube now, but actually uploading a video to YouTube is a series of steps and decisions. And really, what you want a process that is, to your point, it's clear enough that if someone else comes along, they can follow it through and make the right decisions at each of these points. So are we having
Yeah,
subtitles? Are we putting the location in for the video? What are we ticking? What are we not ticking? All of that kind of
yeah,
stuff. Because even, I mean, you for example were talking about, okay, we've got a Kanban card and we're moving it from one process to the next process. So say a designer has finished a job and is moving it over to the next column. It needs to be clear whose job it is to pick it up. Now we know it's going to developer,
yeah,
but is it the designer's job to then tell the developer I put a card over for you,
yeah,
or is it? So I work with a few companies, obviously, and go through a few of these kind of content production processes. And the way we arrange it is that the next person up the tree has this column that they're responsible for.
yeah,
So every day or twice a day, they look at that column, and if there's something that's gone into there, if I put something across, they then know, okay, I'm now taking ownership of this job.
yeah,
I don't have to tell them because the act of moving it into that makes it their responsibility.
yeah, 100%. I think, and that's the key. Same as you, I think an accelerated delivery process means that when a card moves from, uh, let's say you've got three columns, right? You got design to develop a handover, and you've got development, right? In my world, the designer is responsible for what's in the design column, and
Mhm.
whatever is at the top is the most important, and it goes down in importance from thereafter. So they'll pick up that card for design, they'll work on it. When they think they're done and they've checked off all the elements that we say is mandatory for what does done look like, it then moves into the designer to develop a handover. At that point,
Okay.
the designer is still responsible for that work item, right? So
Okay.
they've said, I'm ready to do a handover. It's then their responsibility to go to the developer, to a developer, and say, I'm ready to do a handover of this piece of work. Let me know when you're free.
Okay.
They'll get together, they'll have a meeting, they will discuss the feature, they'll run through it. There may even be a video in the card, and the developer can watch the video beforehand,
Mhm.
whatever. Once that meeting's happened, that card then moves into development. At that point, the developer is now the owner of that work item.
Yeah.
They are then responsible for making sure that they do all the things it's necessary for them to do for that task to be done. When that's done, they will then move it into the ready for PR column, which is ready for peer review.
Mhm.
When it's ready for peer review, they are still responsible at that point for that card. They need to go to somebody and say, my pull request is ready. I
Yeah.
need you to check this out.
Okay.
Once that's done, it then goes into ready for QA. At that point, the tester or the product owner or whoever is responsible for that column, they will then check that column, and then they will say, okay, I got these 3 items that are now ready for testing. I'll do that. I mean, you
Yeah.
tend to batch testing. You won't just test one card at a time. You'll
Yeah.
batch it. But
Sure.
so absolutely, each column has an owner, has somebody who's responsible for it, and then they should be checking that once, two, twice, 3 times a day, whatever it is. It could be that they only check it once a day, on the stand up or whatever. But it's not the responsibility of the product owner to say to somebody, well, where's this task? Well, you haven't moved that to that column. You haven't moved
Yeah.
that to that
Yeah.
column.
Yeah.
And it's not
Yeah.
their responsibility to chase the tickets through the system. It's the responsibility of the owner to do that. And that's, I think this is why you need to, I mean, that those responsibilities need to be declared
Yeah.
because they are not obvious.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Well, it's like, if a developer is working on a feature, it's so easy unless there's clarity. It's so easy to say, well, I've finished that, and my responsibility ends because I've finished that piece of work.
yeah,
Whereas that's what I was saying earlier on. You need to go that little bit further. You need to
yeah,
be specific. You need to be clear.
yeah.
Yeah, I think
And
absolutely. Yeah,
and I think for me personally, the reason that we are so passionate about the accelerated digital delivery process is because if you can define what a good process looks like, the process is also mentoring the person
yes, yes,
because
yeah,
you are learning what it means to be a good citizen through the delivery process, right? Which means that if you leave a company and then you go to another company, for example, where where they may not have the same process, but if you know that your responsibility is to make sure that you understand what done means and that you are responsible for the successful handover of that thing to the next person, whatever it is, then actually you then start improving their process.
yeah. Oh, for sure, for
And
sure.
you individually, you stand out against your peers because you understand the whole context of your role. You're not just a designer who produces wireframes. You're a designer who is responsible for the successful handover and acceptance of a feature. And that's, it sounds, I don't know, it sounds like I'm laboring the point, but it makes the difference. It's marginal gain type thing, isn't it? It's where
Yeah,
it's just that one
yeah,
thing is just significantly better, and the whole system, the whole process then becomes massively better because everybody knows where they
yeah,
stand in relation to, um, you know, uh, their part of the process.
yeah. So I want to get to what what people should do if they're really struggling with this, if they've got teams that aren't taking responsibility. But I think it's one other thing we should mention, that is, if we are clear about processes and we expect people to follow processes, we need to also be in the business of giving them the time and resources they need to actually do them. We're all familiar with that situation where there's a right way to do something, but actually you've got 3 deadlines, in the
Yeah,
next half an hour. And
yeah,
those are the moments when process can really go out the way. It's that lean
yeah,
manufacturing concept of Murray, or
yeah,
overburden. When the system becomes overburdened, things start to break, and processes.
yeah,
And I find this particularly with checklist type processes, we start to jump to the end because
yeah,
we know what we're doing. We've been doing it for years, but actually, the number of times I have jumped through a thing and then gone back because I'm like that and checked the checklist and gone, actually, oh, I forgot that
yeah,
bit. I didn't check
yeah,
to make sure that there were no straight quotes where there should be curly quotes, or I didn't make sure if I was writing in
yeah,
Markdown that there were no stray double asterisks or anything like that. But we
yeah,
need to make sure that people have the time, and that can be, I think, very difficult sometimes, especially if we're busy, especially if things are behind.
yeah.
Um, But
So
we need to recognise there are multiple reasons. Some people maybe, yeah, they struggle with processes. They're just that's not their personality type. Well, maybe we don't. They're not ideal for us. But the other thing is, some people just get so overburdened that it's a struggle.
I think, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think one of the things that people forget, for example, in when people move to like a Kanban process is that, the whole point of Kanban is to set work in progress limits on specific columns. And people
Right?
forget
Yeah.
that. So,
Yeah.
like if you've got one UX person, that you can only have like one or two design items in their column at any one time, right? It
yeah.
cannot move into design if they are, if they're working on more than two things, for example. I don't know. It should only be one thing. I'm a big believer in people work on one thing to completion and then move on, which
Yeah.
is why for me the definition of done is so significant. It's so important because if we're going to give you the time, if I come to you and say, I need you to deliver this feature, right? Like in my team, I've got somebody called Nat, I've got somebody called Callum, for example. If I say to them, you are working on feature X, right? So Nat, I need you to tell me how long it's going to take you to deliver this. And she'll say, okay, well, that would be a week, say.
Hmm.
And then I'll say to Callum, well, how long is it going to take you to deliver your part of this? He might say 2 weeks. Now, when I ask that question, my assumption is, how long is it going to take you to deliver this? And that done is done,
Yeah.
right? That you can check all those items off. So I will say, how long is that going to be? They will tell me, say 2 weeks in total. I'll go back to our client and I will say, that will take 2 weeks to do. It will cost you this much and it will need to be done by blah, blah, blah. Because I've made the assumption that we all know what done looks like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, it could be because we haven't declared what done looks like, for example, then
Hmm.
Callum or Nat might be thinking that, yeah, I'll be done in 2 weeks, but I didn't take into account that I needed to do the mobile screens, or I didn't take into account that I needed to do X, Y, and Z. And so that's when you get the problems. Like, and
Yeah.
that's when overburden becomes a real issue because if we've got a whole bunch of things stacking up waiting for you to work on it, and the thing that you said would take 2 weeks to do actually takes you a month to do,
Yeah.
you have to be
Yeah.
realistic enough to know you know, that it is actually going to take you a month to do, and just say
Yeah.
it. In my business, I never tell my developers how long or my team how long they've got to deliver something. I will always ask them how long something's going to take. I
Yeah.
assume that they understand what done looks like.
Yeah.
I
Because you've
assume
got a clear
we
process.
because we got a clear process,
Yeah.
and therefore, um, you know, the expectation is that it will be done in that time, and
Yeah.
and so, but that it doesn't always work out like that way. This is the real world, and
Yeah.
some things
Sure.
change. But yeah, so that's what we tend to try and do is we tend to try and get, but the commitment on the other side is if you say that something's going to take a month to do, then my expectation is you will do it in that month.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
you spend, I don't know, 3 weeks of the 4 weeks playing a computer game, then you're going to have a pretty busy week four, aren't you? Because my expectation is that you will get that thing delivered in within the 4 weeks.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
going to, I'm not going to, it's as an adult in a business of adults, it's not up to me to be sat down watching somebody code or design for 7.5 hours a day to achieve the outcome they want. They're grown ups. They
No.
should be able to do that for themselves.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if you commit to delivering something, then I expect it to be done in that time. And if it's
Yeah.
not, then there's a problem. It's not just a problem for me, it's a problem for our customers and for all
Yeah.
the other work that we got backlogged
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
So this is what I think. So I think that you set work in progress limits so you know what your team can do at certain times. You don't let things move into those columns until they have a reasonable chance of success. You have to
Yeah.
understand what done looks like so you can give a proper estimate about how long things are going to take. And then you have to commit to doing it. If you, and it's your responsibility then to make sure that either that work is done within the time frame you've allocated, or as soon as you know that's going to happen, as soon as
Yeah.
you know, it's your responsibility to talk to your product owner, talk to whoever, and say, this is not going to be done in that time for these reasons.
Yeah.
And then also tell me, what does that new date look like?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to find out on, 3 weeks and 4 days that it's not going to be done.
You sound
And
like
this
you're
is,
speaking from experience, Matt.
well, I mean, look, like you said, Nick, when I was younger, when I was a young developer slash designer and all that sort of stuff, I've made all these mistakes myself.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
I know
Sure.
how embarrassing it is when you said something is going to take 3 weeks to do and you end up doing it in 6 weeks and looking like a fool.
Mm.
Because I've lived that. So all of the processes that we have in place is meant to um, like accelerate somebody through that learning process. It's
Yeah.
meant to take them from somebody with limited experience of doing what they need to do to being able to operate as if they have years of experience in delivering.
Ah, I
That's
love
the
that.
point of the
Yeah, yeah.
process.
Yeah. 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 Takes them through all the rookie mistakes.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and isn't that
Interesting.
the point of a process? Isn't that the point of checklists?
Yeah, for
But
sure.
and and to your point from earlier, um, you know, everybody gets process fatigue. Everybody
Yeah.
tries to skip to the end. When you've done a process for long enough, you instinctively um want to just get it out. You think, oh, I've done this hundreds of times, I don't need to worry about this. But that's, again, it comes down to personal responsibility then, because
Yeah.
you need the discipline to sit down there and say, yes, I've done this. Yes, I've done that. Oh no, do you know what? I forgot to do the
Yeah.
whatever.
And it
And
happens
that's the
so
point of
often,
them.
that, doesn't it? It happens
When
so often.
when Yeah, absolutely. I mean, human beings are not particularly adapted to, making sure that they're doing consistently repetitive tasks in a consistent way again and again and again. We seek out novelty. We want the new. We
Yeah.
don't want to be stuck in those sort of standardized processes, and that's where personal responsibility and discipline comes in.
Yeah. Yeah. Particularly true in creative industries, I would say,
Yeah, absolutely.
which
Well,
which we'll call coding a creative industry, because it is in a lot
yeah.
of ways, isn't
Uh,
it? But
and it
all
made
right.
me think, as we were thinking about this. You know what it made me think of? It made me think of pilots, because the
Hmm.
aviation industry, and also like Formula One. If you've read Checklist Manifesto by Atul
Yeah.
Gawande, same as me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Now, the aviation industry. I mean, these are people in high stress jobs. You're flying, like thousands of feet above the air with a whole bunch of people in a pressurized blooming, like metal tube, right? And they have, like the the second in command in the cockpit, they will literally run through the checklist every time. They tick it off every time.
Yeah.
And, for when they take off, for when they get ready for landings, for when they, something happens, there is a checklist, there is a process. Now,
Yeah.
that's when you are, those checklists, those processes exist for safety reasons, for the pilots and the crew and for the passengers, right? If in my opinion, if they can run through that every time they want to fly a plane somewhere, then it's not beyond the realms of possibility for a creative team to want to do the same, right? It's just a matter of, like, it's just the discipline of doing it.
Yeah. So I want to get to this idea of, when you go into a team, or when you're consulting with a team who are struggling. Now, we've talked in other videos, we've talked about other things that you can do, but in relation to ownership, in relation to responsibility, what do they need to do? What's the first thing you attack? Is it this setting down the process, the checklists, and what have you, or is it something else?
Yeah. No, it's exactly that. The first thing I do with any struggling delivery team is I make sure that we have a common understanding about what the actual process is.
Okay.
And then this is why, again, we set up our Kanban rules the way we do, because it's absolutely explicit what the
Yeah.
steps are in the process that you're following. So we tend to do that, and then at each one of those points, then we'll say, okay, this role is responsible for these things, and you are responsible for these items. And that's when we produce the checklists. Every team's slightly different. I mean, there's a common theme, of what you need to do. Well, for example, I always like to, when a designer or developer has finished their work, I always like them to record a video of the thing that they've done so that they can then share that down the
Oh,
chain so
that's
that you
useful.
can
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and then it's got two benefits. So the first is that it makes it very clear what you're thinking about when you designed or developed something in the way that you did, but
yeah,
also you can use the videos later on down the road when you with stakeholder meetings and stuff like that, which I think is
yeah,
really nice.
yeah,
um
yeah,
so not everyone does that, but the point is that so you have these common themes, like have I published the Figma files as um, dev ready? Have I made sure I've labeled all of the frames properly so that it's obvious, how things are grouped, that kind of stuff. There's things like that.
yeah,
Like you said, have I made sure everything's using straight quotes versus curly quotes and
yeah,
things like that. So yeah, so we define what those checklists are, and then what we do is we monitor it and we learn, and then we get feedback from everybody, and we will enhance and improve the process as we go.
yeah,
Sometimes it's just a matter of people just not taking the time to do the handovers properly. There's one particular client I worked with earlier in this year, and the single biggest thing I did to improve their overall efficiency was making sure that they had um, an actual 15-minute handover meeting for every feature that had moved into the column,
yeah,
so that we removed any of the ambiguity that people were having about what was expected from them. And it
yeah.
took 15
It's
minutes. It
like we said,
revolutionized.
handovers hurt. You need to do them properly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
So really it is, I would say, for everybody, first things first is clearly set out the stages of your process, and don't
hmm
just go straight from like design to dev, right? There's going to be a designer to dev handover, right? Include that in a
hmm
column. Be
mm.
very explicit, and then define what the criteria is for what done looks like for each of those columns. And then you can just add those to the cards, or you can set up an automation so that when something moves into a new column, that checklist is automatically appended, for example. And then
Yeah,
um, and then and then the other thing is to make sure that the people know what columns they are responsible for, and then at what point do they not then become responsible. And that's, I think, is the simplest way of taking control of your process, but then also ensuring that you've got clear responsibilities, you've got clear personal responsibilities, and this team has defined what those standards are, what those responsibilities are for everybody as a collective.
now I'll take ownership back from you.
Excellent. That's the handover
So,
done.
yeah. Thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.